Malachi Ridge almost kicked the crate before he heard the baby cry inside it. His boot stopped inches from the slats, heel grinding in the packed earth of the barn aisle. That sound didn't belong in his barn, high and thin and terrified. For a half-breath, he thought of a trapped pup, some stray that had crawled in for warmth. Then it came again, wetter, ragged, a human wail that hollowed his chest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Malachi dropped to his knees. The crate sat between the hay bales and the tack wall, rough boards hammered together out of what looked like scrap lumber. One side gaped open, and from inside that dark little box, a bundle of flowered cloth squirmed and cried. His hands shook as he reached for it. Easy, Ridge, he told himself, like he was soothing a spooked mare. Don't grab, don't startle. He gentled half-wild mustangs with less care than he brought to that crate now. He hooked his fingers over the edge and tipped it toward him. Inside lay the smallest baby he'd ever seen. She was swaddled in a worn cotton dress, yellow with faded blue sprigs, bunched up and tied around her like a cocoon. Somebody had wrapped a man's flannel shirt around that, then tucked a thin quilt around the whole bundle until only a round, furious face showed. Her cheeks were streaked red from crying. Tiny fists punched out of the fabric and then vanished again. Her dark hair stuck damply to her forehead, and when she scrunched up to scream again, Malachi saw a dimple appear in her chin. It punched something loose inside him he didn't have a name for. He slid his arms beneath the bundle, feeling how light she was, how hot. The barn wasn't warm this time of year, not this early, and yet her skin burned against his forearms. "Hey," he rasped, voice coming out hoarse. "Hey there, little sprout. Easy now." Her cry hitched, then climbed sharper. He gathered her close against his chest, instinct moving faster than thought. Babies needed heat, didn't they? His memory reached back to a time he'd avoided touching in his mind for years. His sister standing in a doorway, a swaddled bundle in her arms for 3 days before the fever took them both. He shut that door again hard. "You're all right," he lied to the child in his arms. "I've got you." The bundle kicked against his ribs. Something crackled under the quilt. Malachi froze. Carefully, without jostling the baby more than he had to, he peeled back the edge of the worn quilt. A folded scrap of paper lay tucked against her side, the corner gone soft from rubbing against the cloth. He hesitated only a heartbeat before pinching it between his fingers and drawing it out. The paper had been torn from the corner of a ledger or Bible page, lines faintly visible beneath the ink. The handwriting slanted, hurried, the loops of the letters uneven, like the hand that wrote them couldn't quite stop shaking. "Please love her." That was all. 3 words. No name, no directions, no promise they'd be back. Malachi read the line twice, throat tightening. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, looking down at the baby. Her face screwed up again, and she gave a hiccuping sob that ended in a gasp. Love her. It wasn't the sort of request a man should ignore, not when it was left as carefully as a brand on a calf's flank, tucked into a stranger's arms on Christmas morning. He glanced toward the barn doors, where a blade of daylight edged through the slight gap between them, throwing a pale line across the dirt. The ranch yard beyond lay quiet. No boot tracks fresher than his own disturbed the thin dust near the entrance. No horse waited saddled and ready, as if whoever left the child meant to linger and see what he'd do. They'd come in the dark then. Used the back path through the cottonwoods, maybe. Known the dogs slept light and would bark like sin if someone knocked at his door. Known Malachi Ridge spent mornings in his barn before he did anything else. Anger rose under his ribcage, hot and confused, at whoever had abandoned her. At himself, for the way his heart had already hitched its weight toward the bundle in his arms. "All right," he muttered, shifting her higher against his shoulder. Her head fit perfectly under his chin, like she'd been carved to slot into that space. First things first. We get you out of this barn. The smell hit him, then sour and unmistakable. He wrinkled his nose. And then, he added grimly, we find you something dry. He turned toward the house, boots thudding across the barn aisle. The dogs met him halfway between the barn and the porch, hackles raised, then dropped back with low whines when they caught the scent and sound of what he carried. Bandit, the older cattle dog with the torn ear, padded close to Malachi's leg, nose twitching toward the bundle, as if he understood this was something new, something fragile. Guard, Malachi told him quietly. Bandit peeled away, trotting a careful circle around them, eyes scanning the yard and the tree line beyond the split-rail fence. The house loomed ahead, plain plank walls, a porch that needed sanding, one rocking chair with a busted slat. Malachi shouldered the door open with more force than necessary, the wood banging back against the wall. The baby flinched and wailed. Sorry, little sprout. He winced and hurried to the stove, where yesterday's coffee still sat in the pot, cold and black. There was nothing in this house meant for something as small as the life he carried. No cradle, no soft place to set her down. He laid the quilt-wrapped bundle on the kitchen table, one hand still cupped near her head. She squirmed, fists fighting the swaddle. You're mad at me already, he murmured. Figure that makes you smart? Her cry tore at him. He didn't think there was such a thing as a man built for this kind of sound. His hands, the same ones that had broken wild colts and swung a branding iron till his shoulders burned, felt clumsy as he fumbled at the knot holding the dress tight around her. The fabric loosened by degrees. Tiny legs kicked free, bare heels reddened with cold. Her little feet were perfect. 10 impossibly small toes curled and stretched, and he had to stop for a second and brace his hand flat on the table because the sight of them knocked the breath from him. Someone should go to hell for this, he muttered, for leaving her here. The diaper, or what passed for it, looked to be made from strips of torn muslin, pinned clumsily with a bent hairpin. It was soaked through. Swearing softly under his breath, Malachi worked it loose, trying not to poke her with the metal. She squawked, offended, when the air hit her bare skin. I know, he soothed. I know. I ain't any happier about it than you are. He hunted through the drawers one-handed, never leaving her alone on the table. His fingers closed on a stack of old flour sacks, washed to threadbare softness. He tore one into strips and fashioned a makeshift diaper, hands steadier now that he had a task to occupy them. Busy hands meant less room for thinking about what came next. Once she'd been cleaned and wrapped, the baby quieted a little, her cries dropping from full-throated wails to unhappy grunts. Better? He asked. She blinked up at him, dark eyes glossy with tears. They caught the light in a way that made them look almost violet for a heartbeat. Then they settled back to deepest brown. He'd seen that color once before. Stop it, he told himself savagely. Don't go digging in graves. He bundled her back in the flannel and quilt, tucking the edges under her, like he'd learned from watching other men tie down a load that couldn't be allowed to shift. You need food, he said. Which is a problem, little sprout, because I got a whole lot of cows and not one drop of milk in this house that AI and still walking on 4 legs. She answered with a fretful whimper, as if in agreement. Malachi scrubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the rasp of morning stubble. There were women in town who knew about babies. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Hollander at the boarding house. Juniper Vale at the clinic, who delivered half the county and patched up the other half when they did something stupid. He didn't much like the idea of marching into town on Christmas morning with a mystery child in his arms and eyes on him from every storefront. He liked the idea of this baby going hungry even less. He grabbed his coat off the peg by the door and shrugged into it one-armed, the other cradling the bundle tight to his chest. The note he folded, and slid into his pocket. Those 3 words burned there like a brand. Please love her. We'll figure the rest out later, he told the baby. For now, there was only one thing that mattered, getting her what she needed. The town of Copper Ridge was small enough that a man could ride from one end to the other in the time it took a pot of coffee to boil. Malachi still saddled the horse faster than he ever had in his life. He wedged the baby in the crook of his arm and worked one-handed, cinching the girth and tugging at the straps until the gelding snorted and flicked an ear back at him in mild complaint. "You and me both, Jasper," Malachi muttered. "World's gone sideways." He tied a folded blanket around his chest like a sling, settling the baby against his front where he could keep one big hand over her. Her warmth soaked through his shirt. Every time she shifted, his heart seemed to adjust around the movement. He mounted up with more care than he could ever remember using, one hand steady on the saddle horn and the other shielding her head. The ride into town blurred into a series of impressions. Jasper's hooves drumming the packed road, the familiar landmarks sliding past split-rail fences, the crooked cottonwood, the rise where you could see the church steeple if you squinted just right. By the time he reined in at the hitching rail outside Hollander's boarding house, his shoulders ached from tension. The main street wore its holiday try at cheer evergreen boughs draped across porch rails, a few red ribbons gone pale from dust. The saloon was shuttered for the morning. The blacksmith's forge stayed cold. Everyone in Copper Ridge, it seemed, had taken the holiday as an excuse to linger in their kitchens and around their tables. Everyone except Malachi Ridge, who was about to drag whatever piece the morning had brought straight out into the street. He swung down, one arm tightening instinctively around the child when she grumbled at the jostle. "Easy." He patted her back through the quilt. "We gotta do this." The boarding house door creaked open before he could knock. Mrs. Hollander filled the frame, round and formidable in a flour-dusted apron, gray hair escaping her bun in wild curls. She frowned at him, then at the bundle strapped to his chest. "Malachi Ridge," she said, "I know you ain't come for a room, so what in heaven's name is that?" "A problem," he said bluntly. "And I figure you might know what to do with it." Her brows shot up. "Did you steal a baby off someone's porch?" "Found her in my barn." He didn't waste time on pleasantries, didn't have patience for them with the baby's soft breaths ghosting against his shirt. "In a crate." There was a note. Something in his voice must have cut through her skepticism, because Mrs. Hollander's expression shifted. She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Well, don't stand out there jowing about it. Bring the child in before she catches a chill." She wagged a finger at him. "And take your hat off." He hadn't even realized he was still wearing it. Inside, the boarding house parlor smelled like cinnamon and coffee, with an undercurrent of lamp oil and the faint sour of too many people under one roof. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper stars, listing slightly to one side. A half-dozen boarders turned to stare when Malachi stepped in, conversation dipping low, then stopping altogether. "Is that a baby?" Someone whispered. "Whose is it?" Another voice murmured. He kept his gaze fixed on Mrs. Hollander. "I need milk," he said. "And ... whatever else babies take." Lord in heaven. She wiped her hands on her apron and bustled closer, peering at the infant without touching. "She's a tiny thing. How old is she?" "Not a clue." "And you say you found her in your barn? On your place?" "In a crate," he repeated. Her mouth pressed into a flat line. Who would do such a thing? It wasn't really a question. Malachi could have given her a list if he'd let himself. Men who drank up their pay and lost their temper. Women with no one to stand between them and fists or judgment. Folks who saw a child as a debt or a burden instead of a life. He'd spent most of his adult years making damn sure he never became any of them. "I need to feed her," he said again. "You'll need goat's milk, watered and warmed." She won't keep much down yet if she's as new as she looks. Mrs. Hollander spun toward the kitchen. Agnes, get the kettle on. Malachi, sit down before you fall down. He didn't argue. The baby had gone quiet against his chest, but every now and then she made a small, fretful sound that sliced at him worse than any branding iron burn. He lowered himself carefully onto the edge of the nearest chair, one palm cupping the back of her head. The boarding house door banged open again. Smells like you robbed the bakery, Hollander, a familiar drawl announced. Sheriff Gage Latham stepped inside, stamping dust off his boots. He had the kind of face that looked carved from the same rock as the hills outside town, angular, stubborn, a little too sharp to be called handsome, but solid in an unyielding way. His gaze landed on Malachi and the bundle strapped to his chest. His brows climbed. Well, he said slowly, either Copper Ridge has started a new Christmas tradition I didn't hear about, or that's not yours. Morning to you, too, Malachi said, his tone clipped. Morning. Gage tipped his hat to Mrs. Hollander as she returned from the kitchen, then jerked his chin toward the child. You gon' now tell me why the man who swore he'd never have as much as a dog in the house is wearing a baby like a new pair of suspenders? The room tittered. Malachi ignored it. He eased the quilt back just enough for the sheriff to see the baby's face. Gage's flippant expression faltered. Found her in my barn, Malachi said. Left in a crate, wrapped up in this. He nodded toward the quilt. There was a note. Said, please love her. That's it. Hell, Gage muttered under his breath. Mrs. Hollander swatted his arm. Language. You swore too, Hollander, Gage shot back. Soon as I stepped in, you said, Lord in heaven. He faced Malachi again, his jaw tightening. When did you find her? Less than an hour ago. Anybody on the road in or out of your place? Any tracks? I didn't stop to look. The admission tasted like rust. She was burning up. You did right bringing her here, Mrs. Hollander said firmly. Sit tight. We'll get some milk in her and see if we can track down someone with more sense than whoever left her. She hesitated. Unless ... Don't say it, Malachi warned. Unless this is someone's idea of a gift. Her voice softened. It's Christmas, Malachi, he snorted. God doesn't leave his gifts in old fruit crates, he said. Mrs. Hollander's gaze flicked to Gage, something unspoken passing between them. Maybe not, she said. But he has been known to work with whatever's on hand. She pointed a stern finger toward Malachi. You ain't to take that as permission to be stubborn and stupid. If we find out who this child's people are, and they're decent, you'll hand her over. You hear me? The idea of letting go of the small weight against his heart sent a sudden irrational spike of panic through him. He covered it with a shrug. I'll cross that bridge when I know it exists, he said. You won't cross it alone, Gage added quietly. Something in his tone made Malachi look up. The sheriff's gaze was steady. No hint of judgment in it, only concern. They weren't close friends, exactly. Men like them rarely had the luxury of that kind of thing. But they'd ridden together enough times after a rustler, or to pull a wagon out of a flooded arroyo that Malachi knew Gage didn't say a thing he didn't mean. I need names, Gage went on. Anyone who might be desperate enough or scared enough to leave a baby on your property and think you would unshoot first and ask questions later. I don't shoot children, Malachi snapped. I know that. Gage's mouth slanted. Apparently someone else does too. That's the point. Mrs. Hollander returned with a chipped mug and a little rubber-tipped contraption Malachi had never seen before. Juniper brought this from the clinic last month for the Duffy baby, she explained, as if that meant anything to him. Said it made feeding easier when the mama was too tired to sit up. We'll see if it works for our little. She trailed off, squinting down at the baby. Does she have a name? Malachi shook his head. Then we'll get one on her soon enough. Mrs. Hollander rolled up her sleeves. Here, hold her like this. She guided his arms, adjusting the angle of the blanket bundle. Head up a bit more. Support the neck. There. He found himself following orders like a green ranch hand. The baby fussed, rooting blindly as Mrs. Hollander pressed the rubber tip against her mouth. After a few false starts, she latched on. The sound of her swallowing filled the quiet room. Malachi didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until it left him in a rush. "That's it," Mrs. Hollander crooned. "There you go, little one." He stared down at the child, at the way her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. "Love her." The words burned under his skin. "All right," Gage said after a moment, breaking the spell. "I'll ride out to your place, see if I can scare up any sign of who left her. I'll stop by Juniper's, too. She might have heard something. People talk to the woman who sews them back together." "I'll go," Malachi said automatically. "You ain't going anywhere," Mrs. Hollander snapped. "You're staying right there until that baby finishes and burps properly." "I got work to do," he protested weakly. "You have a baby to do," she corrected. "The ranch will wait." She pushed his shoulder down when he tried to rise. "Don't you dare jostle her." The absurdity of it all hit him then, the hardened rancher pinned in place by a woman half his size and an infant no bigger than a sack of feed. He didn't laugh. He was too busy memorizing the sound of that baby's soft swallowing, the way her lashes fluttered against her cheeks. Word traveled faster than any rider in Copper Ridge. By the time the baby had eaten her fill, and Mrs. Hollander had shown Malachi how to coax a burp out of her with careful pats, the town knew he'd turned up on Christmas morning with a foundling strapped to his chest. They came in ones and twos, at first curious boarders, ladies from the church, old men who leaned on their canes and peered with rheumy eyes. "She looks like my youngest did," one woman sighed. "Maybe it's a sign," someone else whispered. For him, Malachi ignored the murmurs as best he could. The baby slept now, exhausted by the effort of feeding and fussing. Her tiny mouth rested open, her breath warm against his collarbone. Every time someone stepped too close, Malachi felt a flare of possessive heat burn through him. He didn't like it. He liked the alternative even less. "You can't keep her," a sharp voice said at his shoulder. He glanced up to find Eliza Kane standing beside his chair. She was dressed for church in a blue dress that matched her eyes, her blonde hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. Eliza had been making not-so-subtle eyes at him for the better part of a year, encouraged by her mother, who saw in Malachi's acreage and herd count a future of security for her daughter. He'd done his best to keep things polite and distant. "Good morning to you, too," he said, the words coming out dry. "I'm serious." She lifted her chin. "You're a bachelor, Malachi. You live 3 miles out of town. You spend more time in the saddle than you do inside 4 walls. What do you know about raising a child?" "Apparently more than whoever left her in my barn," he said. A few of the onlookers snorted. Color rose in Eliza's cheeks. "That's not what I meant. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "You know my cousin in Santa Fe? She and her husband have been trying for a baby for years. If the judge were to place this child somewhere, it ought to be with a proper family. A married couple." "I'm a proper man," Malachi said, feeling stubborn. "And I'm the one who found her. That doesn't make you her father." "No?" he agreed softly, more to himself than to her. "It doesn't." It didn't erase the feel of her in his arms, either. "Eliza," another voice cut in. Juniper Vale stood in the doorway, a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. Juniper didn't bother with church clothes. She wore her usual practical skirt and blouse. The sleeves rolled to her elbows, a faint smear of something dark on her cheek that might have been ink or someone else's blood. Her auburn hair was braided back in a no-nonsense plait, her eyes clear gray and sharp as a hawk's flicked over the room, assessing, measuring, landing on the baby in Malachi's arms last. Something in them softened then, just a fraction. "Doctor," Eliza said tightly. "Midwife," Juniper corrected pleasantly. "On a good day, anyway. Today, I'm apparently also whatever fool thing y'all plan to make me." She nodded toward Malachi. "Hollander said you picked up a stray." "Seems more like she picked me," Malachi said. Juniper's mouth curved, the ghost of a smile. "May I?" she asked. He shifted the baby carefully into her waiting arms before he'd consciously decided to trust her. Juniper moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. She peeled back the blanket just enough to check the baby's skin, her breathing, the soft spot on her head. She listened with her stethoscope, wrapping the chilly metal briefly and apologetically in a bit of cloth first. "She have a fever earlier?" Juniper asked without looking up. "Felt hot," Malachi said. "She's cooler now. You did right getting her in here and fed." Juniper adjusted the blanket. "She was born recent. Cords healed some, but not much. I'd put her under a week old. Could be less." Malachi's stomach twisted. "You think her ma is all right?" The room went quiet. Juniper's hands stilled. "I think," she said carefully, "that any woman who leaves her newborn in a man's barn is either afraid for that baby's life or her own. Maybe both." She glanced at him. "You find anything else? Cloth, basket, anything that smelled like herbs or whiskey?" "Just the crate and the note." "Let me see the note." He handed it over. Juniper studied the 3 words with a frown. "Hasty hand," she murmured, "but not uneducated. Ink's good. Quill cut clean. Whoever wrote this had some schooling." She flipped the paper. "No watermark I can see. No initials. Could have been torn from any book." "It was in my pocket when I got up this morning," Malachi said, rubbing his thumb over the edge. "Feels like more than 3 words to me." "Grief makes everything heavier," Juniper said quietly. He shot her a look. "You saying I'm grieving a stranger's kid?" "I'm saying you smart enough to know this isn't just about the baby." Her gaze held his. "Whoever left her picked your barn, Malachi. They didn't ride past 6 other ranches by accident. You got enemies I don't know about?" "Anyone's got enemies if he's lived long enough," he said. "I mean the kind who put a child in your care as a way of sending a message." The idea turned his stomach. "If this is some fool's way of poking at me," he said slowly, "they're not the sort I plan to ask for tea. You could see it another way." Juniper nestled the baby back into his arms, arranging the blanket so the small face peeked out. "Maybe they picked your barn because they trusted you." He snorted. "You don't even trust me to remember my own appointment times." "You're terrible at remembering them," she said calmly. "But I've yet to see you walk away from anyone who needed help." He looked down at the baby. Her tiny mouth twitched in her sleep, like she was chasing something in a dream. Trust. He wasn't sure he deserved it. But it was there, all the same, curled up against his chest in faded cotton and an old flannel shirt. By the time the shadows started to lengthen outside the boarding house windows, Malachi's head ached from too many voices and too many opinions. Keep her. Don't keep her. Give her to the preacher's family. Send a telegram to the judge in Santa Fe. Let the county decide. Every suggestion felt like someone tugging at the blanket wrapped around his ribs. "Enough," he said finally, his voice cutting through the chatter like a whip crack. The room fell silent. He rose carefully, the baby secure against him. "I appreciate the help," he said, and meant it. Truly. But she is not going to bounce around this town like a stray pup waiting for someone to claim her. He looked at Gage. "You find any sign at my place?" The sheriff shook his head. "Crate tracks lead to the back fence and disappear in the creek bed," he said. "Could have come from any direction. No prints distinct enough to follow. Whoever it was knew what they were doing." "Then there's no one to hand her to," Malachi said simply. "For now, she's with me." "Malachi," Eliza began. "For now," he repeated, meeting her eyes. If her kin show up and they're fit, that's one thing. But until then, she ain't a problem to pass. She's mine to shoulder. The word mine slipped out before he realized he'd chosen it. It felt right in his mouth. Juniper's gaze softened. You'll need supplies, she said. Cloth, more milk, a proper crib. I'll build a box, he said. You'll build a cradle, she corrected. A real one. And until you do, you can use the basket Mrs. Hollander keeps in the pantry for potatoes. It'll serve for a night or two. She hoisted her satchel higher. I'll come out later, check on her. You don't need to. I'll come out later, she repeated, brooking no argument. I got nothing. Better to do than make sure a man who forgets to eat on workdays remembers to feed a baby on time. I ate yesterday, he protested. She just shook her head. Take the sling, Mrs. Hollander said, pressing the folded cloth into his free hand. You'll need both hands on the reins. And you come back tomorrow. You hear? Yes, ma'am, he said automatically. The town watched him go. On the street, the winter air, what passed for winter, this far west felt sharper, cleaner. He adjusted the sling, settled the baby securely against him, and swung up into the saddle. Jasper flicked an ear back and snorted. Yeah, Malachi murmured. I know. This wasn't in the plan. He didn't have many plans these days. Truth be told. Work the ranch. Pay the bank. Sleep when his body forced the issue. Live a life that didn't leave too much room for anything soft enough to break. The baby made a small, contented sound and burrowed closer. He swallowed hard. Guess the plans changed, he said. Back at the ranch, the house felt different the moment he stepped inside. He couldn't have said why. The walls were the same. The sagging chair in the corner. The stack of unpaid bills on the table. The quiet tick of the clock on the mantel. But the air felt full, as if the space itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. Welcome home, he told the baby. The words startled him. He set the potato basket on the floor by the stove, cleaned it out, lined it with an old blanket, and set the baby gently inside. She flailed her arms once, face scrunching, then relaxed when he laid his palm on her belly. I'm right here, he murmured. He moved around the kitchen then, clumsy with the unfamiliar rhythm of balancing chores and glances at the basket. Stoked the stove, checked the pot of milk cooling on the back burner, cut strips of cloth for diapers. Every small task felt heavier, and yet somehow more precise, as if each movement carved a new groove into his life, with this baby fit. He almost didn't notice the silence at first. One moment, she was making small snuffling noises, little contented sighs. The next, nothing. His heart lurched. He dropped the dishcloth and crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside the basket. She lay still, eyes closed. For a single horrifying heartbeat, the world narrowed to that motionless chest. Then her lips parted, and she let out a soft snore. His legs went weak. He braced a hand on the floor and let out a breath that felt like it scraped the inside of his ribs. Don't do that again, he whispered. Ever. She didn't answer. He watched her a moment longer, just to be sure, then forced himself to stand. It was a crib to build. He'd never built one before, but he'd put together corrals, gates, furniture. How different could it be? Very, as it turned out. Every joint seemed to matter more. Every edge had to be sanded smooth. He found himself running his palm along the rough wood, imagining small fingers curling around the rails. He cut the pieces longer than he thought he'd need, making room in the design for a child who might grow faster than he could keep up. What are you doing, Ridge? He asked himself more than once, as the afternoon light shifted across the floor. Building something you can't unbuild. When the hammer blows got too loud, he paused to check on her. Each time, she was there. Each time, his chest loosened a little. He'd just finished sanding the last rail when she woke again with a howl that sounded too big for her tiny body. All right, he murmured, scooping her up. I'm coming. She quieted as soon as she was against him, her cries tapering to soft hiccups. You're worse than a green colt, he told her, bouncing gently. Can't stand to be more than 2 steps away from me. The thought should have suffocated him. Instead, it warmed a hollow place he'd been pretending didn't exist. He fed her again, as Juniper had shown him, careful with the angle, watching for the little signs she was taking it well. Afterward, he walked the floor with her in his arms, humming tunelessly under his breath. He realized halfway through the second circuit that he was humming an old lullaby his mother used to sing when the wind rattled the shutters and the world felt too big. He hadn't thought of that song in years. Don't go dragging up ghosts, he told himself softly. But the ghosts were there anyway, in the way the lamplight curved around the baby's face, in the way her weight settled against him. At some point between one circuit of the room and the next, someone knocked on the door. The sound was sharp in the quiet house. Malachi froze. Bandit lifted his head from his spot by the stove and gave a low, warning growl. Hush, Malachi said automatically, though his own pulse had kicked up. He set the baby carefully back in the basket, tucking the blanket around her, and crossed to the door. His hand hovered over the latch. He wasn't expecting anyone. Juniper had said she'd come by later, but the light outside the window had gone full dark. It felt later than later, and she would have called out. She always did. The knock came again, softer this time. Ridge? It was Gage's voice. Malachi let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and opened the door. The sheriff stood on the porch, hat in his hands. You look like a man who's seen a ghost, Gage observed. You knock like one, Malachi retorted. What is it? Mind if I come in? If you're here to tell me you found kin for her. He jerked his head toward the basket by the stove. You can say it from there. It's not that. Gage stepped inside, glancing automatically toward the sleeping baby. His shoulders seemed to ease a fraction when he saw her chest rise and fall. She's doing all right? So far. Malachi crossed his arms. What did you find? Gage hesitated. We got a rider in just after you left town, he said finally. From the north road. Horse lathered to the eyes. Said he was looking for Copper Ridge, and for a man named Malachi Ridge in particular. Malachi's muscles went tight. Name? He asked. He didn't give one. Gage's jaw worked. But he had questions. About you. About your place. About whether you'd be the sort to take in something that wasn't yours by blood. Malachi felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. What did you tell him? That I don't answer personal questions for strangers. Gage's gaze was steady. He didn't like that much. Said he'd be ridden out this way before long to find out for himself. He took a breath. And that's not the worst of it. Get to the worst of it, then, Malachi said. Gage reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. He handed it over. Malachi unfolded it. The handwriting wasn't the same as the note that burned a hole in his own pocket, but it held a similar urgency, letters dug deep into the page. Ridge, tell him she's alive. Tell him I did what I had to. He can't find her. There was no other explanation. No map. No names. Just the knowledge that someone out there knew about the baby in his house and cared enough to beg a stranger to keep her hidden. Where'd this come from? Malachi's voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Ryder said a woman pushed it into his hand at a way station 50 miles north, Gage said. Told him if he had any decent bone in his body, he'd ride hell for leather to find you and deliver it. He paused. Said she looked like she'd ridden even harder before that. Malachi stared at the note until the words blurred. He thought of the crate in his barn. The 3 words on the first note. The baby sleeping in a potato basket by his stove. Someone's coming for her, he said quietly. Gage's jaw tightened. Looks that way. And someone else wants her kept out of his hands, so bad they re-willin' to risk everything to warn me. Malachi folded the note with slow, deliberate motions and slid it into his pocket beside the first. 2 pieces of paper. 2 sets of words that had already changed everything. You gonna tell me what you're thinking? Gage asked. Malachi looked past him, toward the basket. The baby's fists twitched in her sleep, like she was reaching for something. I'm thinking, he said, that this little sprout just became the most dangerous thing on my land. He met Gage's eyes. And I'm not about to let anybody take her. The sheriff opened his mouth, then closed it again. Bandit gave another low growl, tail thumping uneasily against the floorboards. Somewhere out in the dark, a horse whickered. The sound was too close. Malachi's hand went instinctively to the rifle propped by the door. He's here, he said. Gage turned toward the window, his whole body going alert. Get the lamp, he murmured. Douse it. Malachi crossed to the stove, heart pounding, and pinched the flame out with a practiced flick of his fingers. Darkness rushed in, thick and immediate. He could feel the house breathing around him, every timber and nail, every shadow stretching long. The baby whimpered in her sleep. Malachi moved toward her, every step careful, and laid a hand gently over her tiny chest, feeling the fragile drum of her heart beneath his palm as the sound of hoofbeats drew closer to his door. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Stay with her, he murmured. The knock came, knuckles sharp against the wood. Ridge. A man's voice, deeper now that it was close. I know you're in there. Lights out, but your stock's still in the corral. Malachi slid his hand from the baby's chest to the edge of the basket. She shifted, making a sleepy, disgruntled sound, then settled again. He met Gage's eyes across the dim room. The sheriff gave a single tight nod and eased the door open a hand's breadth. Evenin', Gage drawled, his tone all lazy courtesy. Something I can help you with? Lookin' for Malachi Ridge, the rider said. Man said I'd find him here. Malachi could see him now in the slice of space between door and frame, a tall fellow with a narrow face, and a scar that dragged one corner of his mouth down. His hat sat low over his eyes. He wore his gun like it was part of him, tied down mean at the thigh. You found him, Malachi said. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Sound carried in the dark. The man's gaze flicked past Gage, searching the shadows. You Ridge? That's right. Got questions for you? The stranger shifted, boots scraping on the porch planks. Best asked face to face. We're talking just fine like this, Gage said mildly. State your business. The man's jaw worked. Why's the sheriff answering your door, Ridge? Because I'm stayin' for supper, Gage said, and because I doon't like strangers ridden hard onto my friend's land after dark without saying why. You got a name? Call me Harlan, the man said after a beat. Don't matter more'n that, Harlan. Malachi filed it away. Well, Harlan, Gage said, here's how this is gonna go. You say your piece, then you turn that horse around and ride back the way you came, unless I tell you different. Harlan. Harlan's mouth twisted, scar pulling tighter. Man in town said Ridge here found something in his barn this morning, he said. Something that belonged elsewhere. Town says a lot of things, Gage replied. Most of it nonsense. This ain't. Harlan leaned a fraction closer. I'm here because my employer is missing property. Malachi's fingers dug into the basket's rim. Property. Funny, Gage said. Last I checked, this county didn't let a man own another soul. I ain't talking about a slave, lawman. Harlan's voice dropped. I'm talking about a girl who ran and what she took with her. The room seemed to shrink. Behind his ribs, Malachi felt something old and ugly stir, an anger that had sat quiet for years under dust and grief. It lifted its head now, alert. Your employer got a name? He asked. Only matters that he got money, Harlan said. Enough to see a judge, if it comes to that. Enough to pay men to ride out and look under every roof for what he's owed. What does he think he's owed? Gage pressed. Harlan's gaze slid toward the basket in the shadows before Malachi could shift to block it. He couldn't see the baby from where he stood. The basket sat low, tucked between the stove and the table, cloaked by the dark. But men like Harlan could smell weakness the way a coyote scented blood. Woman named Etta Moore worked up on Boyd Hill, Harlan said. Cook's helper. Went missing 3 nights back. Took something with her that Mr. Boyd says is his by right. Etta. E. Tell him she's alive. Tell him I did what I had to. He can't find her. The note in Malachi's pocket seemed to heat against his thigh. Kellan Boyd. Gage's voice had gone flat. He send you all this way on Christmas just to drag a girl back to his kitchen? Not just a girl. Harlan's gaze kept drifting toward the darker corner of the room. Woman had a brat, less than a week old. Disappeared same night she did. Mr. Boyd says the child is his blood. Says it got took from him without consent. Malachi's stomach turned. So now he sends riders out to scoop up infants like dropped coins? Gage asked. He sends riders out to collect what's his. Harlan snapped. He got paper from a judge saying so. Might be you want to see it before you go standing in his way. Judge in Santa Fe or judge in his pocket? Gage shot back. Harlan's teeth flashed. Judge is a judge. Paper's paper. Law's law. Gage said softly, which means you ain't steppin'. 1 boot in this house without a warrant from my friend and a writ for whatever you reclaiming he stole. He shifted his weight and moved casual, but Malachi could see the tension gathering in his shoulders. You ain't got either. I got eyes, Harlan said. And a nose. He inhaled slow. You smell that? The baby-s undercurrent was there in the air. If a man knew to look for it, milk and powder and something new. A fragile sweetness nothing else carried. Malachi's jaw locked. Beside him, Bandit gave a low warning growl. Smell a lot of things, Gage answered. Sweat, dust, a stranger who's ridden too hard for decent company. Harlan's hand hovered closer to his gun. Your dogs barked like hell when I rode up, he said. Man in town said they did the same this morning, when Ridge here hauled a crate out of his barn. Crate big enough to tuck a newborn in? Man in town needs a hobby, Malachi said, voice rough. Maybe. Harlan's gaze cut toward him. Maybe he needs a reward instead. Mr. Boyd's paying good money for folks who don't mind talking. Malachi pictured Mrs. Hollander's parlor, full of eyes and whispers. Eliza's tight mouth. The boarders leaning in. Somebody had talked. Gage shifted, widening the door just enough to block more of the view inside. I'm only going to say this once, he told Harlan. You ride back to town. You stable your horse. You have yourself some supper, if Hollander'll feed you. Tomorrow, if you want, you can show me that paper you claim to have, and I'll wire the circuit judge myself. Until then, you ain't talking anything off this land except that saddle. You interfering with my employer's rights, Sheriff? Harlan's tone had gone silky. Dangerous. I'm upholding the law, Gage said, which don't much care about your employer's hurt feelings. The air between them felt like the moment before lightning. Malachi's hand itched for his rifle. Behind him, the baby gave a soft, snuffing sigh. Harlan's head snapped toward the sound, eyes narrowing. There, he said. Hear that? Gage didn't blink. Heard the wind, he said. House settles. Dog snores. Lots of sounds in a place like this. That weren't a dog. You callin' me a liar? Gage's voice dropped low. Silence stretched. Finally, Harlan spat over the porch rail. "I'll be back," he said, "with Mr. Boyd, with paper, with men. You think on that while you're singing carols, Sheriff. Ridge." He tipped his hat, the motion mocking. "Enjoy your quiet night while you got it." He turned and stomped down the steps. Hoofbeats pounded the earth a moment later and faded into the dark. Gage shut the door with more care than he'd opened it. Malachi exhaled only when he heard the latch catch. "He's not bluffing," Gage said. "Didn't look like it," Malachi agreed. Bandit padded to the basket, sniffed, then settled himself in front of it, a solid gray barrier between the baby and the door. "He knew," Malachi said quietly. "He could smell her." "Even if he didn't see." "He suspects," Gage corrected. "That's different." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Boyd's got a reputation farther north, but I didn't think he'd cast his shadow all the way down here." "You know him?" "Know of him." Gage's mouth flattened. "One of those men thinks his money and his name mean the whole territory is an extension of his front porch." "And the girl? Theta?" "Don't know her," Gage said. "But Juniper might." He glanced toward the baby. "You keep her close. I'll send for Juniper and put word through town. No one talks to that man or his riders without me present. You hear?" "Town likes to talk," Malachi muttered. "Then we'll give him something better to say." Gage's gaze hardened. "You sure about this, Ridge? You take this girl in proper. You ain't just feeding her and rocking her to sleep. You're painting a target on your chest." Malachi looked down at the basket. The baby slept on, oblivious, one tiny fist pressed against her cheek. He thought of the crate in his barn, the desperation in the second note. "He can't find her. Target's already there," Malachi said. "Only question now is what I do with it." Juniper arrived less than an hour later, winded enough that she didn't bother with knocking. She pushed the door open and strode in, braid half undone, cheeks flushed. "Hollander said Gage came ridden out here like his boots were on fire," she said by way of greeting. "Then Gage's deputy came barreling into my clinic, saying Boyd Hill's trash was sniffing around." Her gaze went straight to the basket. "Is she all right?" "She slept through most of it," Malachi said. "Wish I had," Gage muttered. Juniper dropped to a crouch beside the basket, laying the back of her hand against the baby's forehead. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. "She's holding steady," she said. "That's something." She rose, turning to Malachi. "Show me the notes." "Both of them." He didn't ask how she knew there was a second. He just reached into his pocket and handed them over. Juniper spread them on the table, smoothing the creases with careful fingers. "Please love her," she read softly from the first. Then the second. "Tell him she's alive. Tell him I did what I had to. He can't find her." Her gaze flicked up. "This him is Boyd. You sound sure," Gage said. "Woman doesn't ride herself near to death to get a note into a stranger's hand. Unless the man she runnin' from has teeth." Juniper tapped the second note. "This is guilt ink. Fear, too." "Guilt ink?" Malachi echoed. "You can see it in the way the letters dig," she said. "Like she's carving it more than writing. Whoever she is." Her hand was shacking so bad she had to press hard just to keep the quill steady. Juniper's mouth pressed into a grim line. "Etta Moore, you said?" "That's what Harlan called her," Gage confirmed. "She came through my clinic once," Juniper said slowly. "About 6 months back. Had a cut on her arm from a broken dish. Said she worked up on Boyd Hill. I remember because she kept her eyes on the door the whole time, like she expected someone to come drag her out by the hair." Juniper exhaled. She was heavy with child then. The baby stirred as if answering. "So she knew Boyd would claim the baby," Malachi said. "He claims anything he touches," Gage muttered. "But she didn't leave the child on his front porch," Juniper went on. She rode God knows how far to put her in your barn, Malachi. Of all the places between Boyd Hill and here, she chose you. Don't know whether to be flattered or offended, he said. Take it as a compliment, Juniper replied. You got a reputation for being hard but fair. She must have heard it. Might have believed you'd do what she couldn't. Her gaze softened. Protect her. The word wrapped itself around that hollow place in his chest and pulled. She didn't ask me to protect her, Malachi said roughly. She asked me to love her. And you already do, Juniper said quietly. He looked away. The admission sat on his tongue, heavy. Boyd's coming himself tomorrow, Gage said, breaking the silence. Or as soon as he can get his men saddled. Harlan's the sniffing dog. The rest'll be teeth. He met Malachi's gaze. We can move her. Hide her altogether. Where? Malachi asked. Church basement. Storage room at the clinic. Hollander's attic. Gage ticked off options. Lot of nooks in this town. Boyd's men will tear through every one if they think she's there, Malachi said. And they'd be right to start in town, not out here. Less distance to drag her back. Juniper watched him, expression unreadable. What are you thinking? She asked. He heard himself answer before he'd fully weighed the words. I'm thinking she stays here, he said. Right where Etta left her. Boyd wants to argue. He can do it on my land, looking me in the eye. Gage swore under his breath. You just volunteered for the center of the storm, he said. Storm's coming whether I volunteer or not, Malachi replied. At least this way, I know where it hits. Juniper studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we prepare, she said. I'll bring more milk, cloth, things you'll need if you end up ... She hesitated, then finished softly. If you end up keeping her. If I end up keeping her, he repeated. The words settled into him like a seed. He had no right to them. He wanted them anyway. They didn't sleep much the rest of the night. Gage took the first watch by the window, hat low, revolver loose in his hand. Malachi catnapped in the chair by the stove, waking at every small noise from the basket. Juniper dozed and woke, writing notes in her head for what medicine she'd need if the baby took sick from stress. Dawn seeped into the sky in thin bands of pale color. By the time the first full light touched the hills, riders appeared on the ridge. 3 of them. Even from a distance, Malachi knew which one was Kellan Boyd. He rode in the middle, on the best horse, his posture loose and easy like he owned the ground he crossed. Right on schedule, Gage muttered. You sure you want to do this out front? Juniper asked. Malachi looked at the basket. The baby was awake, eyes wide, taking in the flicker of lamplight and shadow. She stays inside, he said. Bandit guard. The dog thumped his tail once and stationed himself by the basket. Malachi squared his shoulders, took a breath that felt like swallowing dry gravel, and stepped out onto the porch with Gage and Juniper flanking him. The riders drew up 10 yards from the house. Harlan tipped his hat, at Scar twisting his smile. Told you I'd be back, he said. The man beside him had silver at his temples, and a tailored coat that didn't quite hide the paunch at his middle. His hair was neat. His boots were polished. He looked like he'd be more at home behind a ledger than astride a horse. But his eyes were cold. Mr. Boyd, Gage said. Sheriff. Boyd inclined his head a fraction. We appreciate you meeting us civil-like. Lot of ways this could go uncivil, Gage said. I'd rather not see any of 'em. Boyd's gaze slid past him to rest on Malachi. You Ridge? I am. Kellan Boyd. He didn't offer a hand. I own Boyd Hill, up north. Couple 100 head. 4 full-blood stallions. 30-odd employees. Congratulations, Malachi said dryly. You want a medal or a map? Juniper coughed to hide a laugh. Boyd's mouth thinned. I want what's mine, he said. One of my girls ran off with my child. Not how I heard it, Juniper murmured. Boyd's brows flicked. Did I ask you, Miss Vale? You didn't have to, she said. Your reputation got here first. Harlan shifted, hand hovering near his holster. Gage's palm rested on his own gun in a way that could have been casual. You said your child, Gage said. You got proof of that? Boyd pulled a folded document from his coat. Judge in Santa Fe signed this, he said. Establishes paternity. Gives me full rights of custody. Etta Moore's not fit to raise a dog, let alone my blood. Your blood came from somewhere, Juniper snapped. Woman carried that baby for 9 months. Nearly bled out bringing her into the world. Boyd didn't look at her. She was a mistake, he said. Etta, the child, all of it. But I woe and have my name drugged through the mud by some kitchen wench running off with my heir. He said heir like a brand. Malachi felt his fingers curl. Heir to what? He asked. A line of men who think paper changes what they did. Boyd's gaze sharpened. Watch yourself, Ridge. Oh, I'm watching. Malachi stepped down off the porch, closing the distance by a yard. I've been watching since Christmas morning, when I found a baby left in my barn in a crate meant for fruit. Since I read the note that said, please love her. He jerked his chin toward his pocket. Your name wasn't on it. My name don't need to be on it, Boyd snapped. She's mine. She belongs to herself, Juniper said. And to the law, Gage added, which, far as I can see, says her mother entrusted her to Ridge here. That makes him her guardian until a judge hears more than one rich man a side of the story. You ain't a judge, Boyd said. No, Gage agreed. I'm the law in this county, which means I decide who walks onto this land and who doesn't until the circuit judge gets here. He won't see it your way, Boyd said. Maybe not, Gage said, but he'll hear both sides, not just yours, Harlan snorted. You think some traveling robe's gonna go against a man like Boyd? I've seen men smaller than that robe stand taller than any bully with a bankroll, Gage said. Enough. Boyd's patience snapped like dry kindling. I didn't ride all this way to argue feelings. Ridge, you bring that child out here now. We'll ride away quiet. No one needs to get hurt, except her, Malachi said. She'll have a roof, Boyd said. A nurse. A name. She has a name, Malachi shot back. It came out before he realized he'd decided on one. Juniper's head whipped toward him. She does? She asked. Boyd's eyes narrowed. And what name's that? He demanded. Malachi thought of the notes, of Etta's desperation carved into paper. Etta asked me to love her, he said. So until she tells me different, I call her what her mama tried to give her, but you wouldn't. Hope. The word felt right. It settled in the air between them, soft and stubborn. Hope Ridge, Juniper said quietly. Boyd's lip curled. You don't get to hang your name on my child, he snarled. Seems to me you hung worse on her already, Juniper said. Harlan's hand twitched. You watch that mouth, midwife, he growled. Gage stepped forward, putting himself deliberately between Juniper and Harlan. Hands off your guns, he said. All of you. No one's drawing today. You can't stop this, Boyd said. Law's on my side. Then let it say so, Gage replied. In court. With witnesses. You swear before God and a judge that you never raised a hand to Etta Moore, that she left of her own will with no fear for her life or the babies. You swear you didn't force her to sign anything she couldn't read. You swear you've never treated a child in your care as property. Boyd went still. His silence told them more than words. Yeah, Gage said softly. That's what I thought. Malachi's fists clenched at his sides. You think I'm afraid of some saddle sheriff sitting in a clapboard courthouse? Boyd asked. You think I can't buy 10 more like you? Maybe you can, Gage said. But you can't buy this town. He lifted 2 fingers to his lips and whistled, sharp. Bootsteps answered. From the side of the house, from the barn, from the line of cottonwoods beyond the corral, people stepped into view. Mrs. Hollander, apron still dusted with flour, shotgun broken open over her arm. Eliza Kane's father, old rifle resting easy in his hands. A half-dozen ranchers Malachi knew by name, and a few he didn't, all with their own weapons slung and steady. Juniper's deputy from the clinic, bandage roll still stuffed in his pocket. Even a couple of the boarding house boarders, pale but determined. They'd come quiet, circling, waiting on Gage's signal. Now they stood as one line. "Copper Ridge ain't much," Gage said, "but we look after our own." "That child is not your own," Boyd said. "She's more ours than yours right now," Mrs. Hollander called. "We heard what Etta went through on your hill. We heard how she cried a skin god to get that baby away from you before you did what you done to the others." Boyd's head snapped toward her. "You mind your tongue, woman." "Been mindin' it too long," she retorted. "You don't scare me." Malachi's throat tightened. He hadn't known. He'd imagined. He'd filled in the blanks with the worst his mind could conjure. But hearing it said aloud that Etta's prayer hadn't been for herself, but for the tiny life she'd be tucked into his arms, hit him like a hammer. Boyd's horse sidestepped, feeding off his anger. "You got no proof," Boyd snarled. "Just gossip." "I got scars on the backs of 3 different women passed through my hands," Juniper said, voice quiet and deadly. "All of 'em worked under you. All of 'em begged me not to tell, said it would only make it worse." Her eyes flashed. "You lay a finger on any woman in this county again, you won't be answering to a judge." "You'll be answering to me." Harlan laughed, harsh. "What you gonna do, midwife? Bleed me with a needle?" Juniper didn't blink. "You ever seen a man die slow from infection 'cause he thought he was too tough to let anyone clean a knife wound?" She asked. "I have. Wouldn't take much to make sure you do too." For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Boyd jerked his reins hard. "We're done here," he spat. "For now. Sheriff, you just bought yourself a war. Ridge, you just stole my blood." "I didn't steal nothing," Malachi said. "She was left." "You want to talk theft? Look in a mirror." Boyd's gaze burned. "I'm coming back with more than paper," he said. Gage stepped forward, badge catching the light. "You ride out of this county with that threat in your mouth," he said softly, "and you ain't coming back at all, unless it's in chains." Harlan's hand twitched toward his gun. Time slowed. Malachi saw it, the tightening of tendons, the flicker in Harlan's eyes, the way Boyd's horse's ears pinned back. He didn't think. He just moved. His hand went to the rifle propped against the porch rail. He swung it up and leveled it in the span of a breath, sight landing right between Harlan's eyes. "Don't," he said. One syllable. It carried. Harlan froze, fingers hovering over the grip. Around the yard, metal whispered as a dozen other guns came up to match Malachi's. Boyd took it all in the line of townsfolk, the sheriff with his badge, and his steady gaze, the rancher with the rifle who hadn't begged, who hadn't bartered, who had simply stood. He saw, and he calculated. Cold men like him always did. At last he spat in the dirt. "This ain't over," he said. "Maybe not," Gage replied. "But it's over for today. You cross my line again, without papers and a peaceable tongue, and I'll see how long a man like you lasts in a real cell." Boyd wheeled his horse. Harlan hesitated a heartbeat longer, muscles tight, then followed. The third rider, some skinny kid who looked younger than Malachi's last pair of boots, shot one last, uncertain glance at the house before he turned his mount and loped after them. Silence settled, broken only by the creak of leather as the townsfolk lowered their rifles. Malachi's arms felt like stone. He lowered the rifle slowly, every muscle in his body trembling with the aftershock of what could have been. Gage let out a breath. "Was hoping it wouldn't turn into a shootout," he said. "Still might," Juniper said. Men like Boyd don't like losin'. Mrs. Hollander stepped forward. You ain't losin', she told Malachi. Not if we have any say. He swallowed. Thank you, he said. The words felt too small. People began to drift away, some with nods, some with pats to his shoulder, all of them leaving a piece of themselves behind in the dust and the decision AD just made. Soon it was only Gage, Juniper, and Malachi on the porch again. You all right? Gage asked. Ask me when my hands stop shacking, Malachi said. He flexed his fingers. They obeyed, mostly. Juniper laid a hand on his arm. You did good, she said. Didn't do anything, he replied. You stood, she said. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. From inside the house came a thin, rising wail. Hope. Malachi felt it like a rope pulling him back from the edge. Guess she heard the commotion, he said. She heard her father's voice, Juniper said softly. The word caught him off guard. I'm not, he began. You are, she said. Maybe not by blood, but by everything that counts. Etta asked you to love her. You answered. He couldn't argue with that. He didn't really want to. Inside, the house smelled of milk and faint gunpowder, and the nervous sweat he worked up standing-off. Boyd. Hope's face was scrunched red, arms flailing. Bandit looked harried, ears back, as if apologizing for not knowing how to soothe a human pup. I got her, Malachi murmured. He scooped her up, tucking her against his chest. Her cries hitched, then softened as she recognized the solid warmth of him. It's all right, he murmured, swaying without thinking. He's gone. He ain't taking you anywhere, she grumbled, a few more half-hearted wails, then settled, cheek pressed to his shirt. Juniper watched from the doorway, arms folded. She fits there, she said. She's loud there, he returned. Loud means alive, Juniper said. I'll take it. Gage leaned against the wall, hat in his hands. Circuit judge comes through in a month, he said. I'll file papers before then. Swear out statements from you, Hollander. Anyone else who knows what Etta went through. We'll make it official. And Boyd? Malachi asked. He'll lick his wounds a while. Gage's jaw tightened. Man like that'll either double down or slink off and wait for a better chance. Either way, we'll be ready. Malachi echoed. You think you're the only stubborn fool in this county? Gage smiled, brief and tired. We. Juniper stepped closer. I'll write to some folk I know up north, she said. Other midwives. See if Etta made it past Boyd's reach. Maybe she'll answer. Maybe not. But Hope deserves to know her mama tried. Hope shifted, making a soft, hiccuping sound. Malachi smoothed a hand over her back. She know, he said, whether Etta writes or not. I'll tell her. What will you tell her? Juniper asked. He looked down at the tiny face tucked under his chin. I'll tell her, he said slowly, that her mama was braver than she knew. That she rode into the dark with nothing but fear and determination and a baby in her arms. And she chose to leave that baby where she thought she'd be safe instead of talking the easy way out. I'll tell her that whatever Boyd says, she wasn't unwanted. She was fought for. His voice roughened. And I'll tell her that the first time I heard her cry, my whole damn life shifted and I didn't even know it yet. Juniper's eyes shone. That's a good story, she said. It's hers, he replied. Hope made a small noise, almost like agreement. Gage put his hat back on. I'll ride back to town, he said. Make sure Boyd keeps ridden north and not sidling to stir up more trouble. Be careful, Juniper said. Always am, Gage lied amiably. He clasped Malachi's shoulder as he passed. You're not alone in this, he said. Feels like it sometimes, Malachi admitted. Then you ain't looking around enough, Gage said, and stepped out into the light. The rest of the day passed in small, ordinary tasks that felt nothing like ordinary. Juniper showed Malachi how to bathe Hope in a basin without letting her slip. He learned the rhythm of her hunger, the little cues before her face turned tragedy red. He discovered that she liked the sound of his voice when he talked about fence posts and lambing, and the way Jasper always pretended to be meaner than he was. "You're going to bore her to sleep," Juniper teased. "Sleep's what we want," he said. They laughed more than he would have thought possible on a day that had started with threats. When Juniper finally gathered her satchel to leave, the sun had slipped low, painting long shadows across the yard. "You sure you'll be all right?" she asked for the 5th time. "Woman, if you ask again, I'm going to think you don't trust me," he said. "I don't," she replied cheerfully. "But Hope does, and she's got better judgment than most grown men I know." He walked her to the porch. She paused there, looking back at him, at the baby in his arms. "You know this changes everything," she said. "Already has," he replied. "For you," she clarified. He thought of Boyd's rage, of the town's quiet show of force, of Etta somewhere on a road he couldn't see. "For all of us," he said. Juniper nodded. "Then let's make sure it changes it for the better," she said. She stepped down, boots crunching softly, and walked to her horse. Malachi watched until she was a speck on the road. Inside, Hope fussed. He carried her back in, settling into the worn chair by the stove. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't think about the ledger on the table or the fence he needed to mend. He thought about lullabies. He thought about the way her tiny fingers curled around the edge of his shirt as if anchoring herself. He thought about how close he'd come that morning to booting an old crate out of his barn without looking. "You saved me from that," he murmured, stroking a thumb along her cheek. "Reckon I owe you." Hope blinked up at him, eyes dark and solemn. "We'll figure it out," he said. Day by day. He began to hum again, that old song he hadn't wanted to remember. Hope's lashes fluttered. Her grip loosened as sleep pulled at her. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet, holding its secrets. Somewhere far to the north, a man named Kellan Boyd nursed his pride and planned. Somewhere between here and there, a woman named Etta Moore rode under a different patch of sky, maybe looking back, maybe not. Here in a plain plank house with a sagging chair and a potato basket lined with a folded blanket, a rancher sat with a child against his chest and let himself. Imagine a future that wasn't just work and sleep and the ache of old losses. He imagined a little girl talking her first steps on his kitchen floor, her laugh echoing off the rafters, her small hand reaching for his as they walked the fence line. "You landed in the right place, Hope," he whispered into her hair. "I don't know much, but I know that." Her breathing evened out, soft and steady. Bandit stretched at his feet, one eye half open, as if on watch even in rest. Malachi leaned his head back against the worn wood of the chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, the silence in his chest didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of weight he chose. Full of a promise he'd never expected to make and would die before he broke. 2 notes rested in his pocket. One an appeal, one a warning. He had answered them both the only way he knew, how with his body between Hope and the man who wanted to claim her, with his heart cracked open wider than he trusted. Whatever came next, judges, threats, the long work of raising a child would come. He'd be there to meet it. He tightened his arms around Hope's sleeping form, breathed in the scent of milk, and, something like new beginnings, and let the future unspool in his mind, not as a straight line of lonely days, but as a trail with 2 sets of footprints. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the stars wheeled on, indifferent and distant. Inside, under a roof that had seen too much emptiness, a rancher and a baby shared a stubborn, fragile kind of peace. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.